So we now have a panel picking up on a lot of the themes that Nick just discussed. It's the status of light-duty vehicle emissions, the light-duty vehicle emissions control industry, and addressing the importance of real-world emissions targets, measurements and results. I'm just going to move over there to make space for the panelists. Yeah, so if you make your way out, thank you. So in addition to Nick, we have Shirish Shimpi. Shirish joined Cummins after completing his PhD and has over 38 years of experience there. He is currently Director of Emissions Development. The group is responsible for emissions measurement, testing and compliance to emissions regulations. Shirish has a long working relationship with regulatory agencies in the US and abroad in approving emissions test procedures. He is chairman of the Truck and Engine Manufacturers Association's Measurement and Testing Committee and has led the committee for over 15 years, so very well placed to contribute to the discussion. The EMTC, the testing committee, meets regularly with the US EPA and CARB to draft and amend emissions test procedures. We also have Dr. Sadiq Khan, who's the senior transportation researcher at the American College for Energy Efficient Economy, where he leads the heavy-duty vehicle work. He analyses fuel efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions reduction opportunities for light and heavy-duty vehicles and policies to improve transportation system efficiency. He is one of the principal architects behind the NGO position of 40% fuel consumption reduction from heavy-duty vehicles by 2025 from their 2010 levels. And we have Alan Schaefer, who is the Chief Executive of the Diesel Technology Forum, the leading advocate for clean diesel technology, a position he has held since the inception of the organisation in 2000. In this capacity, he directs the forum's policy, research, strategic communications, and outreach activities. His experience and expertise spans environmental, public health, transportation, energy policy at the federal, state, and international levels for nearly 3 decades. Prior to joining the Diesel Technology Forum, he served for 13 years as a Vice President of the Environmental Policy at the American Trucking Associations, ATA. So welcome to all our panelists. I would like to start by, again, picking up on some of the themes that Nick brought up, which is that this divergence between what happens in the real world and on the test bench was well known, and I think it's been highlighted in recent years. In terms of where we are now, how close are we to getting towards, or what steps are being taken to get towards coming closer to real-world driving, meeting what vehicles can achieve now? Maybe we'll start with Mr. Schaefer, speaking on behalf of the diesel technology industry.
There we go. Good morning. Thank you. Well, I would say this is obviously a hot topic of discussion, not just amongst light-duty manufacturers, of course, but really everybody in the industry. And I think all of the members that we represent, have been affected by what's happened in the last year, one way or the other. And you're seeing a lot more attention to oversight, and you're seeing delays in product certification from EPA. That in the consumer space, light-duty vehicles especially. So it's a wide-ranging impact. I think manufacturers are redoubling their efforts, and they're being forced to invest more resources and time into ensuring that the emissions certification tests are in fact complete and correct. So others on the panel, I know Shirish is really more at the forefront of that, so I would defer to him.
Yes, well, again, although this is more on the light-duty side of things, Cummins is actually mainly in the heavy-duty, although we have light-duty products. A lot of the things that I do are more related to the heavy-duty side, and a lot of the comparisons between real world versus a lab hinge more on in-use testing that is going on. And the thing, again, that we have to again, I am in the measurement and testing area, and have been working with EPA and CARB on both the in-use side of things as well as in the lab side of things. What we have to be very cognizant is that, one, compliance. You want to make sure that whatever we do, we are compliant. And the other one, again, when we do testing in use, the route, at least for the heavy duty side of things, is any route. There's no specific route that you have to take. So it's whatever the vehicle is engaged in, you have the in-use equipment has to monitor that, and then you essentially are judged by how the performance of all of that is on the emission side of things. The one thing that a number of people sort of talk about is that especially the Europeans, is the way the testing is challenged in use. And on the in-use side, in the U.S., we have what we call not to exceed zones, and you have to be in that zone for at least 30 seconds before it gets counted against you. Whereas in Europe now, they have been looking at a little different work-based window so that it averages things a little more differently than what's in the U.S. So there are some differences, but again, trying to make sure that the compliance side is followed. That's really what is the key.
I mean, I would add to that. I think the tools like NTE is the crucial part in a way. We can get very excited about doing real on-road testing and validation. If actually most of the windows are non-valid and therefore not counted against you, then actually how powerful a test is that? And I think we have to be very careful about secret dilutions of the effectiveness of regulation. So lots of effort goes to running lots of vehicles on the real road, and then it's undercut by something which is quite complex to understand, and so no one outside the industry knows that it's being undercut, but in effect it's being partially or largely neutralized. And I think the NTE windows in the US does suffer from that problem to some extent. The work-based windows in Europe, less so in principle, but on the light-duty side, if the combination of the boundary conditions, the normalization tools, and then if we have a transfer function on top of that as well, that is a potent recipe for dilution and neutralization, if improperly constructed. Generally speaking, I prefer simple, clear tests with relatively little post-test manipulation and testing as many vehicles as possible. I think that's a better mix. So I think that's why I have some concerns about the direction that RDE is going when you get down into the details.
One thing I do want to comment on is, as far as the work-based window, a lot of that discussion actually started in my committee. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever you want to call it, it did not go to the next step of being adopted in the US. Okay.
Can you share what reason it didn't?
Yeah, one of the things was that when you think about how in-use actually came about, was the consent decree of 1999, 2000 time period, and there were certain things that were agreed to between EPA and the industry,
right.
And changes that this would have, the work-based window would have changed some of those agreements, and that's the reason why it failed.
Good morning. Yeah. So I'll take one point from Shirish, the compliance of the light duty program, and I'll diverge to a different topic, which is very relevant, especially considering the midterm evaluation the light duty standard is going through now, and in light of the technical assessment report that we have got this summer. So effective compliance is very important, and it brings two objectives. One is that it ensures the savings that the rule promises, and the second one, it also increases the credibility of the program. having said that, one area in light duty especially that I think would be very critical in going forward is the credit system, the averaging credit, the upcycle credit, the SC credit, and other things. So when the opportunity comes, I'll focus on upcycle credits when it comes. Should I start now? Or?
Go ahead.
Okay, so in light duty, the upcycle credit plays a big role in promoting new technologies, and this is the point that when we talk about new technologies with limited market penetration, the regulators provide them the upcycle credits, which helps them to achieve reasonable market penetration. Now, in order to avoid the problem that we had with emissions in-use measurement, especially in diesel, there should be some safeguarding for the program or for the credibility of the upcycle program. And in our analysis, we find that when we design the upcycle credits, we should think about the new technology that needs some kind of market boosting. The benefit, in order to have the credibility, the benefit of the technologies must be quantifiable, verifiable, and must be directly to the vehicle, savings to the vehicle, not to the another vehicle. And then we should also think about not giving some kind of credits or anything to the technology that has already been in the market for some good penetration or good adoption rate. We also should think that the technological adoption should be driven by direct benefit in fuel economy and GHG reduction, not by something else like safety or other thing that comes under separate jurisdiction. So if we can ensure these few or some additional points, I think we can avoid the problem we had with diesel in-use emissions, especially in thinking about upcycle credits.
So it sounds like, I mean, a similar thread between all of you speaking is that the testing cycle and the certification has to be almost seen to be valid, rather than using these techniques that, by making the certification complex, it allows people to operate in the margins and chip away at the validity of the testing. Well, one of the things that I wanted to ask about was the in-service surveillance. Practically, how do you see that going? Given that certification is at the time the vehicle is produced, how do you see that being implemented? Maybe if we start at the far end and come back down.
There's a number of different levels need to be thought about this. What the tests are themselves, what the legal standards that would imply non-conformity, as we talked about earlier, but also you've got who's going to do the work. Third parties may or may not be able to participate in this, but from which governments or regulators are actually going to do these tests in Europe? And one of the sticking points in Europe is whether there's going to be a central EU body for doing it or overseeing it, or whether it's going to be delegated to the member states, or some intermediate point between the two. Politically, there seems to be relatively little desire to create politically amongst the member states, there seems to be relatively little desire to create another European Union body, or to give, for example, a lot more money to the JRC to do it. The member states seem to be reluctant to cede control of this. But on the other hand, their track record is really bad. In that virtually no member states at the moment do any in-service surveillance. I think the Germans, the Dutch, and one or two others do some. The UK stopped doing any about 5 years ago, and it's the second biggest market in Europe. So essentially, the process over the last few years that Europe has taken to in-service surveillance, the member states have largely just sort of covered their eyes. So that's not a very credible backdrop. Yet there isn't a desire to really beef up the European regulation. So that's another sticky part of this. So in a way, what tests may be conducted is the easy bit. It is what is that legal and sort of political infrastructure that would organise it and be the muscle behind it. And you know, I have my opinions on probably what would work better, but that at the moment these discussions, there's plenty of discussions going on behind closed doors. The official process hasn't really yet kicked off yet. So personally, I mean, my view is I think there should be as much of a sort of, in quotation marks, free market approach to this, that there should be, that any third party should be able to do tests to certain standards, and if they find a non-conformity and have done testing to a particular standard, then that potentially does have validity, and try and make it as almost competitive situation between third parties as possible. That could create a very effective system, but that's not to say that that's going to happen. That's just my view.
Just to throw the light a little bit differently on the same issue, I won't talk about in-use side, but I'll talk about the lab side, at least in the US. One of the things, especially on the heavy-duty side, that we are concerned about, and the way the regulations are, is that when we do certification, we, at any time, EPA can say, send that certification engine or a sister engine to us, and we will test it. If you don't like the results of the first test, we'll test it one more time, and that's the final number. Now, to that end, we have to work with these regulatory agencies to ensure that they are themselves capable of doing the testing. So when I have my committee meetings and we talk about how the testing ought to be done, one key parameter is how tight are the procedures, so that if somebody like EPA tested, we don't feel that we are penalized because of uneven testing and things of that sort. So that becomes a very important thing. And when I discuss some of these things with European colleagues, I also have represented the US in the European context. Many of the people that I discuss things with say, well, you know, we've got these agencies that we have to we work with, and like VCA and some of that, and we can negotiate with them so that even if the procedure is not, you know, exactly the same way or whatever, this negotiations will allow us to test it a little bit, you know, a little bit differently. So it's.
Okay, any questions from the floor at all? Oh, please, so we start at the front here.
Markus Fischer from Tenneco. I have one question. You know, there were a few spy shots out there for the Ford F-150, I think 2017 with diesel engine supposedly. We have also the MPG, you know, requirements, you know, for the light duty vehicles. We saw the diesels in Europe, you know, are very key building block, you know, to meet the CO2 requirements, you know, to 95 grams per kilometer. So how do you see with the MPG mandate, you know, and CO2 legislation, the diesel for light vehicle pickup trucks or light pickup trucks in the US? Is it that technology? Is it Ford releases supposedly in 2017 one diesel F-150? Is this one a trend that others have to pick up, or how do you see this one in light of really CO2 regulations and emissions?
Can I speak to some of the slides?
Yeah, go please do. Yeah, I do.
Thanks for that question. I have a few slides I just want to share with folks to maybe respond to that a little bit. I think you know, what happens to the U.S. market after the Volkswagen situation is something that's been on everyone's mind for well over a year now. Yes, ours has been on our mind as well. And a few observations about what's happening and what we're seeing in this regard. We have a very high level of confidence from manufacturers that are in the diesel market already. Folks are speaking out favorably about diesels, and we're seeing new products announced. At the Diesel Technology Forum, we have conducted 4 surveys of public and policymaker opinion since the scandal broke to assess whether or not this is being viewed as a diesel problem or a problem for that individual manufacturer. And I think the good news there is that consumers are smart enough to see that this is a problem with one company and not an indictment of a particular technology. So that's very good news. On the market side, we look back last year, we had 4 states in the U.S. that were in double-digit increases in diesel car registrations. Diesels right now, looking at the end of September data, are up more than the overall market, about 6.4%. So just taking that into consideration briefly, you start to feel like things aren't as bad. And I think Adam maybe hinted to this early on. With regards to these testing questions, for those of us who really know the U.S. situation very well and only recently have become enamored of the European way of doing business, the difference between real-world driving and laboratory certification is obvious. It's obvious to all of us. One is a controlled condition, one is a very different condition. It's in the real world and however people can operate their vehicles, which we may never know how many different ways that could be. So it should come as no surprise. I think, the situation got completely out of hand in how it was managed and communicated over there. And it is what it is with regards to that. I think one of the things I'll just share with you on your specific question about what the future for diesels are in the U.S. I think as we look at some data from Martech Research, and you've seen this, these are comments that was filed by the emissions control manufacturers to the technical assessment review. As you look at kind of where vehicles are and where they need to be for compliance for the future greenhouse gas and fuel economy targets, the vehicles that have the most distance to go are the larger vehicles and the larger crossover vehicles. And the diesels are much closer to where they need to be today. A good example is the Ram 1500. The Hemi V8 version of that has to get about 55% better between now and 2025 if everything stays on course. The diesel version of that Ram 1500, the Eco Diesel, only has to get 15% better fuel economy. So you can see the diesels are much further along towards the target than passenger vehicles. And this is especially true in the heavier vehicle segments like pickup trucks. So we would completely find that these vehicles would be ideal for more diesel introductions in the future, just for the simple laws of physics that we see.
Thanks very much.
So I would highlight 2 points here. One is that from my organization, we have fuel neutral policies, so we welcome any technology that satisfies the standard, satisfies the target, and meets the emissions regulations. So we have no bias to diesel or gasoline. And on especially the question that we have on Ford and Ram, my understanding is that the light duty rule will make the light duty vehicle efficient by a longer margin than the diesel. At the same time, when we go for the heavy duty side, the heavy duty pickups regulation, the diesel are improving at a rapid pace now, and especially considering the phase 2 rule in the heavy duty, the diesel pickup will further reduce their emissions by about 15%. So I don't know how that will play in the market, but I know that there are crossovers from light and heavy. But as I said, that as an organization, we welcome all technologies, irrespective of their fuel or anything. But the primary consideration is that they reduce GHG emissions and they improve fuel economy in real world.
I think there's an important macro consideration, which is, in my view, when push comes to shove, the CO2 agenda will win out over the air quality agenda. And the reason for that is, firstly, the CO2 regulations are generally about international treaties, whereas air quality tends to be about local or at least sort of regional laws, as in sort of Europe's air quality rules. But also the CO2 in the relationship with fuel economy, it goes directly to customers' pockets. And governments generally, have faced strong motorist lobbies. So put those two things together versus violations of air quality rules and, foreshortening the lives of X number of people a year. That is a more diffuse problem, and I guess as evidence of to support my view is that in Europe, a lot of cities have been in violation of European air quality laws for a long time, including London. And what's happened in terms of fines and the like is, as far as I know, virtually zero. There are lots of pending lawsuits going nowhere fast, and so that's why I think, yes, that's not to say air quality is not important, but when it comes down to a straight choice, and it's a bit like the graph I put up of, showing the average CO2 between the US, and it's that diesel composition in Europe which gives Europe the edge. Europe is not going to want to give away that edge on CO2. That the CO2 occupies a very powerful position in the general discourse, which is, I guess, good for diesel.
It's certainly much more visible in public, I'd say. Did you want to pick something up on that?
Yeah, I guess interesting perspective that for those of us that have lived in the U.S. clean air and vehicle regulations for the last 30 years, I would say that the emissions and air quality and health effects concerns have really been a more predominant dictator, really, of emissions levels and performance. And fuel economy is, maybe less of a main consideration. It's important to consumers, obviously, but in terms of driving regulatory policy. And, for the outlook for diesels, I think, we've got such great SCR systems now. The technology there is getting less expensive. The packages are getting more compact. We're seeing better efficiencies. Those are the kind of things that will make diesel competitive going forward with battery electric and fuel cell vehicles.
The new technology diesels, they are so much different than what was only a few years ago. And I think that has, energized the diesel industry.
Any more questions from the floor?
I think there's a discussion going on at the moment, particularly in regard to the PEMS regulation and the role of dirty fuel in that and what effect that might have. I'm not at the centre of those discussions. There's probably others that can comment more than I can. But I think, but yes, that has. But I think it is primarily from the particulate side rather than NOx or fuel economy side. Interestingly, our testing, we take a slightly different approaches on both sides of the Atlantic. In Europe, the quality of the fuel and the regulation of fuel is very good, and so you get very consistent quality and high quality both between forecourts and over time, whereas we've observed a lot more variability in the US. So for our US testing, we have blended our own real world fuel, which we keep constant year round. We have a large store of it down in Long Beach to avoid the variabilities that we have observed on the US forecourt.
Anyone else want to pick that up at all? No? Okay. Any more questions from the floor? In that case, we're coming to the end of the time anyway, and the break is waiting. So I'd like to say thank you very much to our panel. It's been a really interesting discussion.
Thank you.
And thank you all for attending. Thanks.
Thank you.